May 5th, 2020. You're the CEO of a company that 7 weeks ago was worth $18 billion. This morning, you laid off 1,900 people, 25% of your workforce. The severance checks alone will cost you $200 million. Your CFO just told you the company is burning $250 million per month. At that rate, you have 60 days before the money runs out. But that's not the decision keeping you awake right now. The decision is this. You've set aside another $250 million. Not for payroll, not for the burn rate, for your hosts. The people who list their homes on your platform. Your board thinks you're insane. Revenue has collapsed 80%. You just laid off a quarter of your team to preserve cash. And now you want to write a $250 million check to people who technically don't work for you. The spreadsheet says, hoard cash, survive, optimize for shareholders. But you already know what you're going to do. Because this isn't the first time you've ignored the spreadsheet. This is Proto. Stories about the moments that separate those who survive from those who build something that lasts. Today's story isn't about crisis management. It's about a pattern that took 18 years to reveal itself. A pattern where the right financial decision and the right moral decision kept turning out to be the same thing. Not because the founder got lucky, because he understood something most people miss when the data breaks down. Let's go back to the beginning. 2007. Brian Chesky is 26 years old, living in San Francisco with his college roommate Joe Gebbia. They're industrial designers, the kind of people who obsess over chair curves and the weight of a doorknob. Rent is due in 3 days. They're $1,200 short. They don't have $1,200. The Democratic National Convention is coming to San Francisco. Hotels are sold out. Chesky and Gebbia have an idea that sounds completely insane. What if they rented out air mattresses in their apartment to conference attendees? $80 a night. Include breakfast. Call it Air Bed and Breakfast. They build a basic website in one night. 3 people book. They make $240. That's it. That's the founding moment. Not a vision for disrupting hospitality, not a 10-year plan, 3 air mattresses on a living room floor because rent was due and they were desperate. Most people hear that story and think, scrappy bootstrap origin, classic Silicon Valley hustle. But look closer at what happens next, because this is where the pattern starts. They pitch investors. 7 consecutive rejections. The feedback is universal. People will never stay in a stranger's home. This will never scale. The liability risk is too high. Chesky and Gebbia are running out of money again. They need $30,000 just to survive another 3 months. Here's the decision. They could get jobs. They could shut down and try something else. They could keep pitching the same investors with a better deck. Instead, they spend 6 weeks hand-making cereal boxes with hot glue guns. It's 2008, presidential election, Obama versus McCain. They design limited edition cereal boxes, Obama O's and Cap'n McCain's, $40 a box. They make 1,000 boxes in their apartment. They raise $30,000 selling cereal. Now, here's the question. Why does this matter? Because Paul Graham, founder of Y Combinator, sees the cereal box stunt and invites them to join the accelerator. Not because the business model is proven, not because the metrics make sense, because the cereal boxes signal something more important than traction. Founder conviction. Willingness to look ridiculous. Willingness to survive. Y Combinator invests $20,000 for 2 to 5% equity. That decision, to bootstrap with cereal boxes instead of taking a traditional investor's money at 25 to 50% dilution, preserves nearly 20% more founder equity. By the time Airbnb goes public in 2020, that 20% is worth billions of dollars. But that's not why Chesky made the decision. He made it because he didn't want investors who needed convincing. He wanted investors who already believed. He was optimizing for conviction, not capital. Let's jump forward to 2009. Airbnb is live. Users can book air mattresses, spare rooms, entire apartments. The product works, but there's a problem. Nobody trusts it. Travelers don't trust staying in strangers' homes. Hosts don't trust letting strangers into their homes. Investors don't trust that this solves a real problem. Chesky is a designer. He knows the product has to communicate trust before people will even consider using it. So he does something that makes zero financial sense. He and his co-founders fly to New York and go door-to-door visiting hosts. They bring professional cameras. They photograph every listing themselves. They redesign host profiles to look less like Craigslist and more like a hospitality brand. They're burning through their Y Combinator money on photography and travel expenses instead of user acquisition ads. The unit economics are terrible. The revenue per booking doesn't even cover the cost of the photography. But bookings start increasing. Not because of ads, because the design is doing the work. The photos signal, this is real, this is safe, someone cares about this. Sequoia leads a Series A, $2.5 million. Airbnb is valued at $25 million. Chesky preserved equity again. Y Combinator's credibility plus the design-first traction story gave him negotiating leverage. Instead of raising at expensive terms with minimal proof, he waited until the story made sense to the right investor. Now we get to the moment that almost kills the company. June 2011. A host in San Francisco, let's call her EJ, comes home to find her apartment ransacked. Guests used her Airbnb listing to rob her. Jewelry, documents, identity theft. Thousands of dollars in damage. She writes a blog post, Airbnb Nightmare. It goes viral. Twitter explodes. Hashtag RIP Airbnb trends. Tech blogs declare the platform dead. The narrative flips overnight from innovative to dangerous. Here's what the spreadsheet says. Minimize liability. Deny responsibility. Blame the host for not vetting guests properly. Contain the damage with PR spin. Here's what Chesky does instead. He writes a public apology. Quote, "We let her down. We dropped the ball. I'm sorry." He announces a $50,000 guarantee for every host, retroactive to all prior incidents. $50,000 per incident. No cap on the number of claims. This is 2011. Airbnb is still a small company. They can't afford a massive wave of claims. But Chesky isn't thinking about the cost. He's thinking about the signal. The $50,000 guarantee says, we absorb the risk, so you don't have to. We're not a listing platform. We're a partner. Within 2 years, the guarantee expands to $1 million, then $3 million. By 2020, Airbnb is spending tens of millions annually on host protection. And here's what happens. The trust crisis becomes the moat. Competitors like HomeAway and VRBO offered listings, but they didn't offer protection. Hosts who wanted real partnership came to Airbnb. The host base grows from 300,000 in 2011 to 7 million by 2020, 23 times growth. Not in spite of the crisis, because of how Chesky responded to it. He allocated capital to stakeholder trust instead of shareholder protection. Let's talk about what's happening under the surface here, because this is the pattern. 3 major decisions so far. 2008. Bootstrap with cereal boxes instead of taking early VC at high dilution. Preserve founder equity. Optimize for investor conviction. 2009. Invest in professional photography instead of user acquisition ads. Burn cash on trust signals instead of growth metrics. 2011. Announce a $50,000 host guarantee in the middle of a PR crisis. Absorb liability instead of deflecting it. Every single decision looks financially irrational in the short term. Every single decision prioritizes stakeholder trust, founders, hosts, users, over spreadsheet optimization. and every single decision compounds. The cereal box decision preserves billions in equity. The photography decision builds the design-first culture that becomes Airbnb's brand. The host guarantee decision creates the host loyalty that survives the 2020 collapse. But in 2011, none of that is obvious yet. In 2011, Chesky is just a 30-year-old CEO making decisions that half the people around him think are crazy. By 2020, Airbnb is one of the most valuable private companies in the world. 7,500 employees, 7 million hosts. Pre-IPO valuation, $18 billion. The IPO is planned for April. Roadshow decks are ready. Investors are lined up. And then COVID-19 hits. March 11th, 2020. The World Health Organization declares COVID-19 a global pandemic. Travel stops. Not slowly, not gradually, overnight. Airbnb's revenue collapses 80% in 8 weeks. Bookings that were supposed to happen in April, May, June, canceled. Refund requests flood in. Hosts are panicking. Guests are panicking. The IPO is dead. The company is burning $250 million per month. At that burn rate, Airbnb has maybe 60 days before it runs out of cash entirely. Chesky hasn't slept more than 4 hours a night in 3 weeks. He's talking to the board, talking to investors, talking to his co-founders. Everyone is running worst-case scenarios. The spreadsheet says, cut costs immediately, lay off 50% of the workforce, suspend all non-essential spending, hoard every dollar, maximize runway. Chesky knows he has to cut. There's no scenario where the company survives without cutting. But here's the question that's keeping him up at night. How do you cut 25% of your workforce when your entire brand is built on belonging? Let me put you in Chesky's position for a moment. It's 3 in the morning. You're sitting at your kitchen table. There's a spreadsheet open on your laptop. 1,900 names. These are the people you're about to lay off. Some of them have been with you since the cereal box days. Some of them joined because they believed in the mission. All of them have families, mortgages, lives. The CFO's recommendation is clear. Lay them off immediately. Give them 2 weeks severance, industry standard. Minimize costs. Preserve cash for the people who remain. You close the laptop. You're not thinking about the spreadsheet anymore. You're thinking about what this company is supposed to stand for. May 5th, 2020. Chesky announces the layoffs. 1,900 employees. 25% of the workforce. But here's what he does differently. 14 weeks of severance. Not 2 weeks, 14. Extended healthcare coverage for the entire severance period. 12 months of free career coaching and job placement support. Laptops, equipment. Laid-off employees can keep everything. Stock vesting accelerated for everyone. And he writes a memo. Not a corporate PR statement, a real memo. He explains the decision. He takes full responsibility. He apologizes. He explains why these specific cuts, why now, what the company will look like after. Quote, I've said many times that I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but I want to lead with my heart. We need to act in a way that honors the community we've built. The memo becomes one of the most widely shared CEO communications of 2020. Not because it's eloquent, because it's honest. The severance package costs Airbnb close to $200 million. $200 million they don't have. But it's not the cost that matters, it's the signal. Departing employees become Airbnb advocates. They tell their networks, I just got laid off and the company treated me with dignity. When Airbnb recovers and starts rehiring, half the people who come back are referrals from people who were laid off. The culture doesn't collapse. It strengthens. But Chesky isn't done. Remember, the company just laid off 1,900 people to preserve cash. The burn rate is still $250 million a month. The board is telling him to cut everything non-essential, and Chesky sets aside another $250 million for hosts. Not shareholders, hosts. Here's the situation. Hosts are getting killed. Bookings are canceled. Revenue has disappeared. Many of them rely on Airbnb income to pay mortgages. Some of them are facing foreclosure. The contractual relationship is clear. Airbnb is a platform. Hosts are independent contractors. Airbnb has no legal obligation to bail them out. But Chesky doesn't care about the legal obligation. He cares about the relationship. The $250 million fund compensates hosts for lost bookings. Not all of it, nobody gets made whole, but enough to signal, we're not abandoning you. The board thinks he's making a catastrophic mistake. You just laid off a quarter of your workforce. You're burning cash. The company might not survive. And you're writing a $250 million check to people who don't even work for you? Chesky's answer is simple. If we lose the hosts, we lose the company. Let's be very clear about what's happening here. This is not generosity. This is not charity. This is capital allocation. Chesky is making a bet. The bet is this. Stakeholder trust is more durable than cash reserves when the future is unpredictable. He can't forecast when travel will recover. He can't model the revenue. The data is completely broken. Nobody knows what the next 6 months look like, but he knows this. If hosts abandon the platform, there's nothing to recover to. If employees lose faith in leadership, the company can't execute. If the culture collapses, Airbnb becomes just another tech company fighting for survival. So he allocates capital to the things he can control: relationships, trust, moral clarity. And he hopes like hell it's enough. Here's what happens next. June 2020. Bookings start stabilizing. Not recovering, stabilizing. July. Travel restrictions start easing in some regions. People are desperate to get out of their homes. But they don't want hotels. They want private spaces. Entire homes. Exactly what Airbnb offers. August. Bookings are growing again. September. The company hits break-even. The burn rate drops to 0. October. Airbnb files for IPO. December 10th, 2020. 7 months after laying off 1,900 people. 7 months after burning $250 million per month. Airbnb goes public. IPO priced at $68 per share. Opens for trading at $146. Closes the day at $147. 115% gain on day one. The valuation hits $100 billion. The company is worth over $100 billion. 100 billion. More than Marriott, Hilton, and Hyatt combined. Not in spite of the crisis, because of how Chesky navigated it. Now, here's the thing most people miss about this story. The 2020 crisis wasn't the pattern, it was the proof. The real pattern started in 2008 with the cereal boxes. It continued in 2009 with the photography. It crystallized in 2011 with the host guarantee. And it revealed itself in 2020 when the entire world fell apart and Chesky made the same choice he'd been making for 12 years. Choose stakeholder trust over spreadsheet optimization. Every time the data broke down, every time the future became unpredictable, Chesky asked himself the same question. Not what maximizes shareholder value, not what does the model say. He asked, what preserves the relationships that make this company possible? And every single time, that decision compounded. Let's extract the principle. The principle is not be generous in a crisis. The principle is not care about your people. Those things matter, but they're not the mechanism. The mechanism is this. When data cannot predict outcomes, capital allocation becomes a psychological bet. You can't optimize a spreadsheet when the future is unknown. You can only optimize for optionality. And optionality comes from trust. Here's how it works. In 2008, Chesky bet on founder equity preservation and investor conviction over immediate capital. That preserved leverage for every future fundraising round. Compounding effect. Billions in retained equity. In 2009, he bet on design and trust signals over growth metrics. That built the brand and host relationships. Compounding effect. Host loyalty that survives the 2020 collapse. In 2011, he bet on absorbing liability over minimizing cost. That created the host protection moat. Compounding effect. 23 times host base growth over 9 years. In 2020, he bet on stakeholder trust over cash hoarding. That preserved the supply side, the employee base, and the brand. Compounding effect, premium IPO valuation, faster recovery than competitors, culture that survived intact. Every decision looked irrational in the short term. Every decision was correct in the long term. Not because Chesky got lucky, because he understood that in extreme uncertainty, psychology is the durable asset. Let me give you 3 ways to apply this. First, audit your last 5 major decisions. Which one's optimized for spreadsheet outcomes? Which one's optimized for stakeholder trust? If you can't point to at least one decision in the last year where you chose conviction over metrics, you're over-optimizing for a world that's more predictable than it actually is. Second, build your crisis principles now. Chesky didn't invent his decision-making framework in March 2020. He'd been using it for 12 years. When the crisis hit, he didn't have to deliberate. He already knew what kind of leader he was. If you wait until the crisis to figure out your principles, you'll default to the spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet optimizes for survival, not recovery. Third, recognize when the data breaks down. Most people keep optimizing spreadsheets even after the assumptions collapse. They forecast revenue when the market has fundamentally shifted. They cut costs when the real problem is trust. The signal that you're in a psychology-driven situation is this. Your smartest people are giving you 3 completely different recommendations. When expertise diverges, you're in the fog. And in the fog, stakeholder trust is the only compass that doesn't spin. Here's the hard part. This framework doesn't work if you're faking it. Chesky didn't write a generous severance package because it would play well in the press. He wrote it because he actually believed the company should honor its community. The sincerity is weight-bearing. If you try to use stakeholder trust as a tactic, as a way to manipulate people into loyalty, it collapses the moment things get hard. Because people can feel the difference between principle and performance. The reason Chesky's decisions compounded is because they were consistent. 18 years, same framework, even when the data said he was wrong. That's the difference between a crisis survival story and an 18-year compounding story. One more thing. Chesky preserved about 10% equity through IPO. That's $9 billion in net worth as of 2020. The early decision to bootstrap with cereal boxes, optimizing for conviction instead of capital, was worth billions by itself. The 2011 decision to absorb host liability, optimizing for trust instead of cost, created the moat that justified a $100 billion valuation. The 2020 decision to pay 14 weeks severance, optimizing for dignity instead of cash, preserved the culture that enabled the recovery. Psychology-driven capital allocation isn't soft. It's not about being nice. It's about recognizing that when the future is unknowable, relationships are the only assets that preserve optionality. And optionality is the only edge that compounds over 18 years. Next time on Proto, we're going back to the beginning, because before you can allocate capital, you need to understand where it comes from. And most people get the first decision, the one that sets the trajectory, completely wrong. We're going to meet Sarah Blakely. She started Spanx with $5,000, bootstrapped to $1 billion valuation, and said no to every single investor who wanted in. Why would you turn down free money when you're building a company? Turns out, it's not free. That's next time.